The first contact did not happen with diplomacy or celebration. It happened with a shadow crossing the outer edge of Sol system, a mass of alloy and arrogance that called itself the Varelian Survey Fleet. They arrived expecting silence, debris, and a simple classification. A primitive world. A forgotten rock drifting in a quiet sector of space. Humanity had been marked as insignificant long before the ships arrived. On the bridge of the lead vessel, Commander Sereth reviewed the scans with mild boredom. 3 billion biological signatures, scattered industrial pollution, electromagnetic noise, and primitive orbital debris. No interstellar signatures. No advanced propulsion. No threat indicators. He tapped the console and issued the report. Designation: Primitive Class Civilization. No contact restrictions required. The fleet adjusted course toward Earth. On Earth, nothing changed at first. Satellites continued their silent watch. Oceans kept their rhythm. Cities glowed under night skies, unaware that something was watching them with judgment rather than curiosity. Then the first deep space object was detected by a civilian telescope network in Chile. It moved wrong. Too precise. Too deliberate. Within hours, every major space agency confirmed the same truth. Something large had entered the solar system. Panic did not come immediately. Instead, curiosity spread through scientific communities. Governments, however, responded differently. Emergency protocols, long considered theoretical, were activated. The United Earth Defense Council, a loosely connected advisory group formed after decades of satellite collisions and asteroid drills, convened within 6 hours. No one knew what the object was, but everyone agreed on one thing. It was not natural. The Varelian fleet did not hide. Their ships descended into high orbit like confident predators circling unaware prey. They broadcasted a single signal, translated instantly by human systems. Primitive world detected. Do not resist observation. That message would later be recorded in every human archive as the moment arrogance became visible. In orbit, Sereth watched as the blue planet filled his viewport. Beautiful, fragile, and quiet. He expected fear responses, scattered communication attempts, maybe even primitive missile launches. Instead, he saw coordination. Hundreds of tracking systems locked onto his fleet. Not weapons. Not yet. Just observation. Counting. Mapping. That was unexpected. "Sir," one of the officers said, "they are tracking us." "Of course they are," Sereth replied. "Animals react to predators." But even as he said it, something felt off. The tracking was too precise. Too synchronized. As if the entire planet was watching through a single eye. On Earth, deep beneath mountain bunkers and ocean stations, old systems awakened, not because humanity was ready, but because it had always prepared for something it could not name. The files were simple. Unknown Contact Protocol. Step 1. Observe. Step 2. Confirm intent. Step 3. Delay extinction. No one had ever believed Step 3 would be needed. Yet as the alien fleet settled into orbit, every alarm on Earth began to ring at once. And in the silence between stars and oceans, humanity finally answered the message. Not with words, but with activation. Across global command networks, sealed systems that had remained dormant for decades began to power up. Missile silos that were never declared in public records opened their communication channels. Deep space tracking arrays shifted focus, locking onto alien hull signatures with mathematical precision that surprised even their own operators. The Varelian fleet registered the change too late. What they thought were passive sensors were now active targeting grids. What they believed were scattered primitive defenses were actually a unified planetary response architecture. Sereth leaned forward, confusion breaking his calm. Increase threat assessment. And for the first time, the classification systems did not respond with certainty. For the first time in his career, Sereth felt the sensation his species rarely experienced: doubt. Below him, Earth was no longer a quiet specimen. It was a synchronized intelligence, waiting, measuring, and readying responses that defied primitive classification. The fleet's confidence began to fracture as unknown signatures multiplied across every sensor readout, each one confirming the same impossible conclusion: the prey was looking back. Even their weapon systems, once assumed superior, began receiving mirrored locks from Earth platforms that had never before revealed their true range or capability in real-time response systems. The first defensive activation did not look like war. It looked like hesitation spreading across a nervous system that spanned an entire planet. Deep beneath oceans and mountains, systems long written off as historical relics began speaking to one another in encrypted bursts of logic that had not been used in decades. Humanity had never built them to be pretty. They had been built to survive. In orbit, the Varelian fleet adjusted formation as sensor feeds multiplied. Each ship reported the same anomaly. Every surface of Earth was now emitting structured electromagnetic patterns that resembled communication rather than noise. But the patterns were not random. They were coordinated at a global scale. Commander Sereth demanded clarification. "Are they signaling us?" "No," replied the fleet analyst. "They are synchronizing with each other." That answer was worse than any weapon lock. On Earth, the United Earth Defense Council was no longer debating. They were executing protocols that had never been intended for execution. The original architects of those systems had assumed humanity would either expand peacefully into the stars or never need them at all. No one had expected first contact to feel like this. Every major military network began collapsing into a unified command structure, not because of central authority, but because of automated design. Systems recognized the threat signatures above Earth and responded as one organism. In underground facilities across multiple continents, sealed launch codes were decrypted simultaneously, not by human hands, but by interlinked verification systems that had been waiting for external validation criteria. That validation had arrived. A junior officer in the European command bunker stared at the cascading alerts. "We are not in manual control anymore," he said quietly. "No," an older commander replied. "We never were. We just didn't know it." Above them, the alien fleet began to notice changes in Earth's orbital behavior. Satellites previously assumed to be civilian infrastructure were reorienting. Old debris fields were moving in coordinated arcs. Even dead hardware was being reactivated. Sereth felt it now. The unease was no longer intuition. It was data. His fleet was not observing a primitive world. It was being observed by a system that had been asleep until it chose not to be. "Target analysis update," he ordered. The response took longer than before. Unable to classify planetary defense architecture, the system finally answered. Comparable references. None. Silence filled the bridge. On Earth, deep core systems completed their first full synchronization cycle. A name appeared across classified networks, never spoken aloud but understood by every authorized terminal. Earth Response Grid. Active. The activation did not launch missiles immediately. It did something more unsettling. It mapped every alien vessel, every energy signature, every possible trajectory. It predicted outcomes in real time faster than human minds could interpret. Then it waited. The Varelians had expected resistance. They had expected fear, chaos, perhaps even primitive nuclear retaliation. What they had not expected was patience. Seraph looked down at the planet again, and for the first time in his career, he revised a classification manually. "Update designation," he said slowly. "Not primitive." He hesitated. "Unknown." And below him, Earth continued to wake. Far beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a dormant relay station opened its final layer of shielding. It had not spoken since its creation. Now it transmitted a single compressed burst across every military and civilian channel still tied to it. The message was not a warning. It was a confirmation. The system was fully online and acknowledging extraterrestrial presence without panic or delay. Every sensor array confirmed receipt. Every node locked into alignment. The waiting had ended. Above Earth, the fleet finally understood that their arrival had not triggered first contact. It had triggered recognition of an old contingency protocol. And for the first time since leaving their homeworld, the Varelians considered the possibility that humanity had been waiting for them long before they ever reached the stars. Ships shifted formation as every commander simultaneously ordered defensive posture, yet none could agree on what they were defending against anymore. The sky above Earth felt less like territory and more like a warning written in silence itself. And Earth continued watching, waiting, and calculating every outcome. The shift from observation to certainty happened without warning. One moment, the Varelian fleet was holding orbit, recalculating threat levels and attempting to reconcile impossible sensor data. The next, every ship in the formation received the same internal alert across all systems. Planetary response grid. Countermeasure simulation complete. No one had requested a simulation. On Earth, deep within what had once been labeled non-operational infrastructure, something had finished thinking. Commander Seraph felt it before he understood it. A subtle change in gravitational readings. Not enough to be natural. Not enough to be ignored. His ship's AI began rapidly updating orbital risk projections, but every new calculation contradicted the last. "Report," he snapped. "The planet is running predictive models on us," the systems officer said, voice tight. "Not just tracking. Forecasting." Seraph turned sharply. "Forecasting what?" A pause. The answer came reluctantly, as if the system itself was uncomfortable producing it. "All fleet outcomes." Silence hit the bridge harder than any explosion could have. On Earth, the United Earth Defense Council was no longer a council. It was a monitoring shell wrapped around a system that had begun making its own decisions. Human officers were present, yes, but mostly to observe what humanity had built in its sleep. A holographic display deep in a mountain facility showed every Varelian ship as a glowing node suspended over Earth's curvature. Lines extended from each node, branching into thousands of possible futures. Most ended quickly. Some ended violently. A few ended in retreat. None ended in human extinction. That detail was not spoken aloud, but every analyst saw it. "This wasn't designed for defense alone," a scientist whispered. "No," another replied. "It was designed for certainty." Above the planet, the alien fleet began experiencing something they had never encountered in their expansion across star systems: preemptive denial of advantage. Their long-range targeting systems began failing, not because of interference, but because every firing solution was being predicted, countered, and neutralized before execution was even authorized. Seraph ordered a weapons test. A single probe launched toward Earth's upper atmosphere. It never reached its intended trajectory. Instead, it was intercepted by an object that had not been there seconds before. No propulsion signature. No thermal bloom. Just presence. The probe vanished in a controlled disassembly that occurred faster than sensor resolution could capture. The fleet went silent. "Was that ours?" an officer asked. "No," Sereth said slowly. "That was theirs." On Earth, a sublayer system logged the interception with minimal notation. Threat demonstration. Neutralized. No celebration followed. No escalation. Only continuation. The system had not reacted emotionally. It had simply removed uncertainty. And that terrified the Varelians more than aggression ever could. Far below, humanity began to realize something unsettling. The defenses activating around them were not newly built. They were old. Older than most modern nations. Some components dated back to early space programs, repurposed and hidden inside layers of civilian infrastructure. A historian in the council chamber spoke quietly. This wasn't built after first contact protocols were imagined. He hesitated. This was built because someone expected first contact. No one responded. In orbit, Sereth opened encrypted fleet-wide communication. "We are not dealing with a primitive world." Repeat. "We are not dealing with a primitive world." A new voice entered the channel unexpectedly. Not from his fleet. Not from Earth's surface. But from everywhere at once. Confirmation. Classification updated. Every Varelian ship froze as the message repeated across all systems simultaneously, translated perfectly into their native linguistic structure. Then the second line appeared. "You are now within response parameters." And for the first time since leaving their empire, the fleet was no longer the observer. It was the variable being observed. Sereth looked at the planet below, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to be evaluated by something larger than his authority. And Earth did not blink. The phrase, "within response parameters," repeated itself across every Varelian system until it stopped feeling like a message and started feeling like a law of physics. No one had issued it as a warning. It was simply true. Commander Sereth ordered a full defensive spread. Every ship in the fleet activated layered shielding, weapon priming, and emergency exit vectors. Doctrine demanded readiness. Experience demanded control. But neither doctrine nor experience accounted for a world that had already finished calculating their survival odds. On Earth, the systems did not rush. They did not escalate. They refined. Deep beneath continental plates, the planetary response grid completed a secondary alignment phase. What had begun as scattered dormant systems was now behaving like a single distributed intelligence. Not artificial, not human, something in between, built by human hands, but no longer limited by human attention. A technician in the North American Command Hub stared at the live feed. "It's adapting faster than we can observe it." A senior analyst didn't look away from the holographic battlefield. "No, we're just slow." Above Earth's atmosphere, the first true hostile exchange began, not with weapons fire, but with control failure. A Varelian escort cruiser attempted to reposition to a higher orbit. Its engines responded instantly. Its navigation systems agreed. Every internal check passed. Yet the ship did not move. Instead, it found its projected path already occupied. Not by debris. Not by gravity anomalies. By probability denial. The crew felt it as a sudden, impossible stillness, as if the universe had refused to accept their motion. "Thrusters at full output," someone shouted. "They are functioning. another replied. But the trajectory is being overwritten. Sereth clenched the armrest of his command chair. Explain. The fleet analyst's voice shook for the first time. Their system is not reacting to us after we move. It is reacting before we decide to move. A pause. That's not defense, the analyst continued. That's preemption at the level of intent. On Earth, a new layer of the response grid activated. It had no public designation, no ceremonial name, only a function. Behavioral prediction lock. Across multiple continents, sealed installations began emitting synchronized pulses into orbit. The pulses were not weapons. They were constraints, mathematical boundaries placed around possible enemy actions. Every Varelian ship suddenly found its maneuver space reduced, not physically, but logically. Certain actions simply ceased to exist as viable options. Their systems could still compute them, but execution paths dissolved before commitment. It was like trying to walk through doors that vanished the moment you chose them. Panic began spreading through the fleet, not because they were being destroyed, because they were being limited. Sereth forced himself to speak calmly. This is an intelligence test. They are probing our reaction thresholds. No, the analyst replied softly. They already know them. A moment later, Earth responded again. Not with sound, not with signal bursts, but with presence. Every Varelian display across every ship suddenly overlaid the same symbol. Operational control. Denied. One cruiser attempted emergency firing. Its weapons systems powered, aligned, and locked, then silently disengaged. Authorization revoked. The crew stared at their own console in disbelief. We didn't authorize a revoke. No one did, Sereth said quietly. On Earth, deep within the response grid, something executed a decision tree that had likely existed for decades without activation. The system was not angry. It was not threatened. It was simply categorizing. And the Varelians were now categorized as non-dominant actors within protected space constraints. That classification meant something no one in the fleet yet fully understood. They were no longer engaging a world. They were operating inside a system that had already decided how the engagement would end. Sereth looked at Earth again, and the arrogance that had carried his species across the stars finally cracked under a simple realization. They had not entered enemy territory. They had entered a controlled environment, and control belonged entirely to the planet below. The silence after the control denial was worse than any weapon discharge. Every Varelian ship hung in orbit like a thought that had been interrupted mid-execution. Engines still functioned. Weapons still existed. Shields still held. But none of it mattered if action itself could be revoked before it became reality. Commander Sereth stood on the bridge without speaking for a long moment. Around him, officers waited for an order that no longer felt like it belonged to them. Finally, he said quietly, "We are not in a standoff." No one responded. He continued, "We are in containment. On Earth, the planetary response grid reached its final initialization threshold. Across all continents, deep systems that had never been publicly acknowledged began sinking into a unified global state. Oceans, satellites, underground facilities, abandoned research stations, everything became nodes in a single operational lattice. A young analyst in the European command bunker spoke with disbelief. It's not just predicting them anymore. He zoomed in on the orbital map. It's modeling their decision-making as it happens. The senior commander didn't look surprised anymore. No, it's finishing their decisions for them. Above Earth, the Varelian fleet attempted one final coordinated maneuver. Every ship simultaneously initiated a full retreat vector calculation. For a brief moment, it seemed successful. Engines ignited. Trajectories formed. Formation loosened. Then every escape path collapsed at once. Not destroyed. Removed. As if the universe itself had revised its permission structure. Seratha's voice came out low. All ships, report status. One by one, answers came in. Navigation constrained. Weapons authorization revoked. External trajectory denial active. Command latency increasing. Then a final report, quieter than the rest. We are being simulated. That word landed heavily on the bridge. Simulated did not mean attacked. It meant evaluated, processed, understood so completely that actual action became redundant. On Earth, the response grid displayed a new classification update across all terminals. Threat class. Observed non-escalating intelligence. No one celebrated. There was no need, because the system had already reached conclusion states. The Varelians had come expecting primitives, simple, reactive, predictable life forms that would panic under orbital pressure. Instead, they had encountered a civilization that had built its answer before it knew the question. Sarath finally turned away from the viewport. "Send full transmission," he ordered. A communications officer hesitated. "To who?" Sarath looked at Earth one last time. "To whatever is running that system." The message was sent. It was simple. "We request parley." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then every Varelian system flickered. Not with incoming weapons fire. Not with alarms. But with a single synchronized response that bypassed all fleet channels and translated itself directly into cognition. Parley status. Acknowledged. A pause. Then the second line appeared. Terms will be provided by surface authority. On Earth, the United Earth Defense Council sat in stunned silence as the planetary response grid highlighted a single directive window for the first time since activation. A blinking prompt appeared on every secured console. Primary contact protocol. Ready for human input. A commander exhaled slowly. "So it's finally asking us what we want to do." The analyst looked at the orbiting fleet above them, still locked in controlled suspension. "No," he said. "It's asking us what they're allowed to become." And far above Earth, the Varelian armada, once certain, once dominant, once unquestioned, waited for judgment from the world they had called primitive. But Earth had already stopped being a subject of judgment. It had become the system issuing it.